Welcome to the Teens Talk podcast, created by the Student Virtual Board of You Celebrate Diversity. You Celebrate Diversity supports students and teachers organizing locally, educating themselves and their peers, and taking action for inclusion and social justice. For more information, visit ycdiversity.org. Welcome back to Season 2, which is all about community building. Today, joined with me is Dr. Katie Randall, Chief Development and Communications Officer at the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Teens Talk. This season, again, is about community building. And today's focus is actually about homelessness and the impact it can have on community and that communities can have on it. Today, joined with me is Dr. Randall from the Boulder Homeless Shelter. She's going to be talking more about her work and homelessness in general around Boulder specifically, but we might also touch on other cities in Colorado. My name is Lamise McCowie. I'm going to be the host for this episode again, and we're just going to jump right into it. So, if you're new here, community is the backbone of culture. The right community provides you with much needed love and support. Everyone needs community, and it can look different all over the world. The important thing is building a community with the right intention, as well as understanding the possible obstacles you could face. So she has already a lovely presentation that I actually had, the privilege of being able to hear in my own class. I thought would be great to bring here. So without further ado, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Lamise. And like she said, my name is Dr. Katie Randall. I am the Chief Development and Communications Officer at the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless here in Boulder, Colorado. And her professor for one of her sociology courses reached out to me and wondered if I could provide a presentation on homelessness and homeless services here in our community. And so I will be referring to a presentation that I had previously, but I believe these slides and this PDF will be available for those who are interested later on. But okay, so first things first, I'm going to briefly introduce the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless, then touch on our vision and mission here as an organization, then dive into homeless services, aka what we do, homelessness 101, because I understand there's a lot of just lack of awareness and ignorance about homelessness and those individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And then I'm going to chat a little bit about homeless solutions and provide some contact information for myself and the organization if anyone has any questions and would like to follow up. So with formed in the winter of 1982 as the Task Force on Shelter and Food for the Poor.
I'm so sorry. It froze like right when you started. So if you could just go back, I'm so sorry for you to start just basically when you said without further, you just started right there. I don't know what happened.
Okay. No. It's okay. The internet can go in and out up here, and I don't know if you're in Boulder right now, but the weather's kind of weird today.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not in Boulder, but I did hear about it. So okay, if that happens,
Okay.
I'll just like try to let you know real quick. I just didn't want to interrupt all the time. But yeah.
No, you're good. So table of contents or just like right in.
Um, just right as when you were getting back into it, you just like covered everything you were gonna cover.
Okay, perfect. Alrighty. And so without much further ado, I will just dive in and tell you a little bit about the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless. So we were founded in the winter of 1982 in response to the death of a local Vietnam War veteran who had been experiencing homelessness that winter. He died from exposure. And a group of concerned citizens said that that was absolutely unacceptable in this community, and they decided to do something about it. And as a response, they formed the Task Force for Shelter and Food for the Poor, which was ultimately the precursor to the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless. And since we are recording this in March of 2023, we recently just celebrated our 40th anniversary. So we have come a very, very long way as an organization, both in size and in the services and programs that we provide for our clients in the 40 years that we have been in existence. And as a result, we are now the largest provider of homeless services in Boulder County, Colorado. And it's really really important to us that we aren't just trying to slap a band-aid on the issue or deal with it piecemeal. We as an organization are just driven to affect the most change as possible. And as a result, over those 40 years, this has meant that we have realigned our mission to be a housing first or housing focused mission. Now, housing first, for those of you who might be familiar with this terminology, is a philosophy or an approach to homeless services and homeless assistance that prioritizes breaking the cycle of homelessness by providing a stable address and a place to live. In short, it focuses any available assistance and intervention that leads to ending someone's episode of homelessness. And really quickly, before I continue talking about that philosophy, you'll notice throughout the presentation that I really strive to use people first language, because homelessness is not an adjective for someone. It is a period of time, it's an episode of being unhoused that a person goes through. So that is one part of this presentation that might stand out to folks, and I just want to put that out there. But continuing along with Housing First, there are a lot of organizations that are work first, excuse me, that make their clients be sober before they can access services or resources, or even make folks adhere to some kind of religious belief or specific ideological dogma. We do not have any of those stipulations here at the Boulder Shelter. We are what we like to call a low barrier service provider. And what that means is that anyone who needs homeless services, so immediate emergency overnight shelter, as long as they agree not to be a threat to themselves or others while they are here, they are more than welcome to come and utilize our services. And so that's what it means to be a low barrier model for homeless services. And for us, it's really important because, again, circling back to housing first, more people can effectively change the trajectory of their lives from a stable foundation. And that stable foundation is housing. So again, we don't require folks to be sober. We don't require them to be employed or adhere to a specific belief system. We just try to provide them any and all resources that lead to a stable place to live. Because Housing First is actually the only data-driven, effective way to deal with homelessness, because people can more reliably deal with other obstacles in their lives from the safety and security of a home. So people can more effectively find jobs and work on unemployment. They can more effectively deal with any physical or mental health concerns that they might be dealing with. They can more effectively work on their relations with substances if they're going through a period of substance abuse once they have a stable place to live. And so for that reason, that is why we have worked to create avenues of stable housing for the adults in Boulder County, or excuse me, in the Boulder County community who are experiencing homelessness. Again, that is our mission, and it really aligns with our vision to make homelessness rare and brief in Boulder County, and to serve as a thought leader for other homeless services providers across the Front Range and Denver metropolitan area. So Boulder, Colorado, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a small to medium-sized town in the northern Front Range of Colorado. And we are just northwest of the Denver community, and we are part of the larger conglomerate of the Denver metropolitan area. So we do work quite closely with other homeless services providers in the Denver metropolitan area, just to make sure that we are all aligning our services to help the most people that we can, and not to make sure that we're duplicating any services unnecessarily. And so again, that's a great segue into our work, our homeless services. So as a housing focused shelter, that's kind of our first thing that we do. So there are two aspects to homeless services. One is handling and addressing immediate needs, and that oftentimes comes in the form of emergency overnight shelter. So for folks who are experiencing homelessness on a day-to-day basis, they need somewhere safe and secure to go in the evenings. And so that is our housing focused emergency overnight shelter. We have the capacity for 160 adults, and in our emergency overnight shelter, we provide dinner and breakfast for folks. We have different healthcare providers who, on different days of the week, who provide mental and physical healthcare services that our clients would not be able to receive otherwise. Our emergency overnight shelter also serves as a post office for folks, kind of a catch-22. If you are struggling with unemployment and you want to apply for a job, you have to put an address in to apply for a job, which is kind of bullshit, but that's the way the world works. So we serve as a post office for folks. They can use this address to receive mail, and we hold mail for them for up to 2 weeks for them to come and get it. But if they don't receive it, we do have to send it back to USPS. We also have showers and laundry facilities for folks to use while they're here, along with lockers and storage. So really, we try to provide as many resources as we can without overcommitting ourselves, because we do try to streamline the resources that we do have in order to affect as many exits from homelessness as possible. And so again, the short-term aspect of homeless services is that emergency overnight shelter. And then the second kind of component of homeless services is actually creating exits from homelessness, or housing exits, as we like to call them. And so what that means is we work from the second people walk through our doors every evening at 5 o'clock. Our program staff and our case managers are reaching out to folks to say, hey, what do you need to get housed? And a lot of times folks are like, oh my goodness, each person experiencing homelessness is so unique, and they're so they have so many different experiences that make homelessness unique to that person. And while that is true, when people ask me for the defining characteristic that overwhelmingly defines or describes our clients, I say that they are all experiencing homelessness, because they are. Um, and so our program staff and our case managers work with them to get them government issued IDs, to sign them up for benefits from Veterans Affairs, the VA, or Social Security. And a lot of times our clients work through the Department of Housing and Urban Development for rental assistance. And so there are a couple of different components to helping folks achieve and maintain their housing. And that is finding folks a housing unit, a place to live, and then helping them maintain their ability to pay their rent and honor their lease. And so we work with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, like I said, both at the federal and the local and state levels, to make sure that our clients have access to the housing vouchers and rental assistance vouchers that help them maintain their housing. And so case management support is sort of the second aspect of our housing focus shelter. And again, these case managers work with folks and connect them with housing resources, counseling, and medical care to, again, overcome any obstacles that they might be dealing with on their journey to permanent sustainable housing. And then another aspect about the shelter that most people don't really aren't really aware of or don't understand is that we provide permanent supportive housing. And so for a lot of clients and a lot of individuals experiencing homelessness, these are folks who are dealing with a plethora of obstacles and issues in their lives that inhibit them from being able to successfully live independently. And so permanent supportive housing is a program that we have and we're extremely proud of. We are currently supporting around 140 individuals in their own housing units through case managers. And so these are individuals who are not dissimilar from social workers. They go in and they provide 24/7 wraparound support to our clients. And so each of these clients has a different intersection of issues that they might be dealing with. Some have mental health concerns, others have severe physical health concerns, and they need round the clock support. Other folks are dealing with a lot of sustained trauma, and others are just battling with substance abuse. And they really need that 24/7 care and support that our caseworkers provide. And so, like I said, we provide permanent supportive housing for about 140 of our clients, in addition to the 160 people that we support in our emergency overnight shelter. And so at the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless, we actually have a permanent supportive housing facility. It's called Lee Hill. And these are all apartment units that are above a first floor. And on that first floor, it's kind of like the hub for our caseworkers and our case managers. And they are all centrally located. And it's been really, really incredible because all of the clients that we support in permanent supportive housing are what we call really high utilizers. These are folks that have been in and out of the criminal justice system. These are folks that are frequently in and out of the emergency room department in our local hospitals, and they just really, really have a high acuity of need. And so through permanent supportive housing, we have significantly decrease the cost that these folks are accruing on taxpayers here locally. And so we recently just had a program with Boulder Community Health, one of the local hospitals, and folks that were racking up, say, around $3 million in costs from high utilization of emergency room services. We housed them through our permanent supportive housing program, and those costs dropped from 3 million to, I want to say, about 1.2 million. And so if we do need exact numbers on that, I'm happy to do that. They're somewhere deep in my inbox. But that just goes to show that while people might be saying, oh, well, housing someone is so expensive. Well, it is expensive, but it's way more expensive to have someone be experiencing homelessness on the street, frequently engaging our first responders, both police and emergency AMR ambulatory care. That is so incredibly expensive in our community. And we want to not only support those who need the most help, but also make our community more affordable for everyone who lives here. And so that's just a little bit about our homeless services that we provide here. And now I'm going to dive in a little bit to Homelessness 101. And so, like I mentioned earlier in my introduction, there's a lot of myths around homelessness and the folks who experience homelessness. And I'm happy to provide additional resources and guides. But all of the data that I'm going to be going over can be found on the annual reports for a couple of our partner agencies. And so that is the Metropolitan Denver Homelessness Initiative, or MDHI, and the Homeless Solutions for Boulder County, so HSBC. Those are two of our really big partners here in the community. And all of the data, like I said, comes from their annual reports. So just really quickly diving in, 15% in 2021, 15% of individuals who were experiencing homelessness reported that they were actively fleeing from a domestic violence situation. And so one thing that I would like to dive into quite briefly is that there are a number of different homeless service providers in the Boulder County community. I'm very happy to say that in the 40 years that the Boulder Shelter has been in existence, a number of other organizations have also come along. And like I mentioned before, we also don't try to duplicate services because we are operating in a funding scarce environment. And so we want to make sure that we are using the funding that we have effectively and efficiently as possible to help the most people who need the most support. And so whenever we have someone who is under the age of 18 who comes to the shelter seeking our services, we are actually an adult only population. And so what that means is folks who are 21, 22 and older, those are our primary demographics. We work closely, however, with the youth homeless shelter here in Boulder County, and that is together. And anytime someone who is a youth or looks under the age of 18, 21, we immediately call up together and say, hey, we have someone who needs your services, and we make sure that that person is taken care of before moving on to our next client. And the same can be said for women and families. So we work very closely with SPAN, and Mother House, excuse me, that just totally went out of my head. Those are two shelter and emergency service providers here in Boulder County that work directly with individuals fleeing situations of domestic violence and women and mothers and with children. And so we really try to, again, not duplicate services and make sure that folks are going to the right service providers to get the care that they need. And that's really, really important to us because folks might be like, well, why can't you just take everybody in? And homeless shelters can be a very tense environment because of all of the trauma and all of the stress that people are bringing into these environments. And so, a homeless shelter for adults is run by staff who are trained in trauma informed care responses for adults. Our staff are not trained on how to help children or women with children. And so we always direct them to service providers who do have that training, who do have that kind of support that they can offer. Um, another kind of interesting number that we have here is that 8% of individuals experiencing homelessness reported that they were a service veteran. So one thing that I'm going to say the last three presidential administrations have been doing with bipartisan levels of support, which is kind of impressive given the state of the country these days, is that there's been a huge initiative to work to end veteran homelessness in this country. And so even though we have 8% of our individuals reported experiencing homelessness, across the country overall, veteran homelessness has gone down, I want to say around 50%. Again, don't quote me on that. I'm happy to pull up that number for you. But it's really, really incredible how the VA has stepped up and really just changed the game for service veterans who have been experiencing homelessness. And another interesting sort of component of our clients is that 78% of individuals reported having at least one disabling condition that impacts their ability to live independently. So, like I was talking about permanent supportive housing, permanent supportive care previously, we understand that folks who are experiencing homelessness might have fallen into homelessness because they have an obstacle in their life that they are struggling to deal with on their own, and that impedes them from being able to maintain independent living. That obstacle is already extremely difficult for that individual to deal with, and that only becomes more exacerbated when they are trying to survive on the streets unhoused. Something that folks don't frequently really understand is that is the myth of substance abuse. A lot of ignorant people say, well, that person's just addicted to meth and that's why they're homeless. That is so far from the case. The vast majority of people who are experiencing homelessness and have a substance abuse problem have only had that problem develop once they fell into homelessness. The vast majority of people who use and abuse drugs have homes. And because there are so many very, very dangerous and very, very serious substances on the streets, like meth and trank and fentanyl, once our clients fall into homelessness, they are then exposed to that. And the sheer trauma and exhaustion of trying to survive on a day to day basis, they want an escape from that. They want to numb that. And so when they have exposure to these kinds of substances, that frequently is where substance abuse gets introduced in the cycle of homelessness. Another aspect that we hear a lot around the Boulder community, but frequently across the world in this country, excuse me, is that, well, if they wanted a house, they could just get it. People want to be homeless. People do not want to be homeless. Homelessness sucks. I cannot emphasize this enough. It is horrific on so many different levels. But of the percentage of people who are experiencing homelessness, less than 1% deliberately choose a transient, unhoused lifestyle. And I want to reiterate that less than 1% of the population of people experiencing homelessness deliberately choose a transient, unhoused lifestyle. That means the 99.9% of the other individuals experiencing homelessness do not want to be homeless. Again, it is an extremely, extremely difficult way to live. And actually, the average age that someone passes away when they have been experiencing chronic homelessness is 56. That is how hard homelessness is on the human psyche and the human body. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Just a couple of mythbuster moments. If you ever just have a conversation about homelessness with someone. And so kind of diving back into that, Boulder County is a predominantly white community. And unlike other areas with homeless shelters, the demographic of our clients reflects that. So the average individual experiencing homelessness in Boulder County identifies as a 42-year-old white non-Latina male. However, with that in mind, we do see a number of women, transgender and non-binary individuals who seek our services. And as a result, excuse me, we have dormitories for those individuals at our shelter specifically, since overwhelmingly the primary demographic that we serve is men or male identifying. That means the largest dormitories that we have are for men and male identifying individuals. However, for folks who are transgender, non-binary, and for women, they all have separate dormitories with their own enclosed bathrooms because we want to make sure that we're promoting a safe and secure environment for everyone who seeks our services at the shelter. That's incredibly important to us here. Excuse me. And so in 2022, another really interesting statistic is that 91% of our beds were used. And so, like I said, we have 160 beds available every single night. And that number is simply the number that's our capacity that the fire marshal came in, did whatever magical math they do on how many people you can fit in square footage, I guess. And 160 is the number that they arrived at. Um, However, in Boulder County, Colorado, we do have pretty severe winters here. Folks do enjoy winter sports, but when you're trying to survive on the streets, it can be extremely difficult. And so we, excuse me, have critical weather criteria. And so what that means is that during the winter season, or severe weather season, as we call it here, we have actually negotiated with the fire marshal to increase our capacity to 180 on days when we have critical weather. And so critical weather in Boulder County looks like 6 inches of snow or more, 20 degrees or below during the day, or 10 degrees below, or 10 degrees or below during the night. Extremely high winds. In 2021, we had the Marshall Fire in December. It was started, ignited by a windstorm. And so as a result, we have taken extremely high wind gusts of 70 miles per hour or more into our critical weather criteria because we don't want folks at the mercy of the elements when something like that is happening. And so those are our critical weather criteria. And so we do open for emergency shelter during those times. And the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless is actually, we are only open for services at night. So we're an overnight shelter. And so that means we open at 5 p.m. and folks have to leave by 8 a.m. And so when we do have emergency or critical weather, we will open for emergency day shelter or emergency night shelter. We're not going to try and force people to be out there in the most extreme of conditions. And so another number that we're pretty proud of, and this kind of takes us into our next point, is that as a housing focused shelter, like I was saying, we leverage all of our resources, all of our services, all of our staff to effect as many exits from homelessness as possible. And so a housing exit for us is a really happy story. It's a happy ending. That means this person exited homelessness and has a home, like has a place that they can call home, a home of their own. And in 2022, I'm very proud to say that we had 90 housing exits. We keep data for each year since 2017 when we officially transitioned into a housing first or housing focused organization. But since 1996, we have housed over 1,200 individuals. And so that's something that's really amazing for us that keeps us going. And a lot of folks will try to kind of crash that party for us by saying, well, if you've housed so many people, then why are there still so many homeless individuals in the town? And that's because homelessness has been on the rise in the last 3 years. So while as an organization, we might be housing more individuals than ever before, there are also more individuals than ever before who are experiencing homelessness, not only in our community, but across the entire country. And so that kind of goes into our housing exits. And these are permanent housing solutions, happy endings, however you'd like to think of them. And I'll just share a couple of them really quickly. And I do want to say for the record that the names of the individuals and some of these details have been anonymized because we take protecting our clients' confidentiality extremely seriously. We don't want anyone to be at risk of anyone trying to track them down or anyone just becoming famous and having their story warped or misinterpreted. But we do have a couple of stories that I can share with you. So Mara came to Colorado fleeing a situation of pretty severe domestic violence. She had to leave many of her belongings behind, and as a result, she arrived here with minimal financial assets. She had previously engaged with a number of domestic violence-oriented shelters and resources, but none of them, unfortunately, were able to provide her enough support to successfully resolve her episode of homelessness. And after using up the allotted shelter nights that those domestic violence agencies could provide, Mara reached out to us here at the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless. And through staying at the emergency overnight shelter and using the services that our case management support team provided, Mara was entered into the Housing or Department of Housing and Urban Development's Section 8 housing lottery, and her name came up. She got a housing voucher and she found a landlord through working with our landlord specialist who was willing to rent their property to her and accept her housing voucher. And so she is so excited to be in her own home and just really, really start being able to rebuild her life. Um, Another housing exit that we had this past winter is from George. So George first came to the shelter in 2015, and it was his first time experiencing homelessness. He stayed at the shelter from 2015 onward, and he's what we at the shelter call a long stayer. He stayed approximately 2,100 nights at the shelter. That's a really, really long time. And at first he was resistant to housing, just very not interested in it for a number of different reasons. But as his health began deteriorating, he had some pretty severe medical issues that began to arise. And he finally agreed that housing would create a place for him to really address his medical issues and to be able to receive consistent care and treatment for them. And this past winter, an opening came up at a senior housing community, and he finally agreed to accept that. And so now I've been told that his health is doing a bit better, but he has a number of issues that he's working on. And so that again is a happy ending for us. And third and finally, we have Brent. So Brent had worked and lived in the city of Boulder for roughly 30 years. However, a series of debilitating medical issues, he was diagnosed with a number of neurological conditions. Brent was unable to maintain his job in the IT field. And once he lost his job, his housing followed quickly after, and then he reached out to the shelter for support. He stayed at the Boulder shelter for roughly about a year. And within that time, he was able to work with our case management to get him on the housing track, but also to work with the healthcare partners that we work with to schedule a number of different procedures and tests that really helped him maintain and gain control over his neurological health. And so once again, we got him set up with that housing lottery, and he was able to find his own housing unit here in Boulder County. And now that he is safely and securely housed and he's able to have his healthcare under control, he now volunteers in the IT field, which was his passion for all those years. And so, like I said, each individual has unique circumstances and a unique set of obstacles that they have to overcome in order to get back to secure housing, secure permanent housing. But the overwhelming characteristic is that they are all experiencing homelessness. And so our case managers and our support staff work with folks to find that unique set of I guess, sort of levers and pulleys that we have to work in order to provide services to people. And so with that, I'll just wrap up. If you have any questions or comments or are just really interested further in homelessness and homeless services here, please reach out. Our social media handle is at Boulder Shelter. Our phone number is 303-468-4312. And you can find us through our email at development, DEVELOPMENT at bouldershelter.org. You can also find us on the web at bouldershelter.org. But yeah, please ask questions. I love to answer anything that you have or follow up on anything that I didn't address before.
Thank you so much. That was honestly an amazing presentation. And when I first heard it, I was genuinely like really moved to want to actually do more because I remember you actually mentioned this while we were in the class, but you said, you know, you could like give some a homeless person on the street like $1 to feel better, but like what really requires, you know, it requires more community and it requires more work from multiple people to actually get something done. And everything. I wanted to let you get all of that out because you hit so many important points that I don't think a lot of people know. Like even me when I was doing some more research about homelessness in Colorado and just the nation in general, there's just like a lot of things that come up that I actually wanted to ask you about because I feel like as somebody who is actually working in it and not just, you know, doing the research, you might have a better, I guess, have better insight on it. But some of the things you hit, because I mentioned, I also jotted down some things. So one thing I wanted to ask about before we get more into what you covered, I also have been really like um curious to understand how, and I mean I was able to answer it more for myself later on, but I also want other people to know that this is happening, just be aware of it. The fact that you can be arrested for being homeless in certain areas in the country. I know for Denver it was a really big problem because I'm from like Denver and Aurora, both those cities.
Mhm.
So I know a bit more about that. And obviously if you don't know every stat of every city, that totally makes sense. So you might only know what's specific to Boulder. But if you have like any more insight about that, I'd love to know just how, first of all, it comes about and just the kind of like thinking, I guess, politicians or lawmakers have when it comes to just arresting someone for simply not being housed. And maybe just some of the ways that we could combat that, whether it's through voting or through, you know, any kind of way to kind of just make this not a reality for certain people. I would love to know. So if you had any insight on that, that would be great.
Absolutely. Wow, there's a lot there. I'm going to try and boil it down a bit. Um, Boulder City, or the city of Boulder, rather, is one of many cities across the United States that has a camping ban. And so what that means is that folks are not allowed to provide any sort of shelter for themselves more than a blanket if they are camping in a public space. This camping ban is currently under suit by the ACLU. And I would just like to say, as a representative of the Boulder Shelter, we do not support the criminalization of homelessness because that's what it does. A camping ban doesn't end someone's homelessness, and it doesn't do anything to provide services for them. You just criminalize the act of someone being unhoused. And again, the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless does not support the criminalization of homelessness. And we, yeah, as a person speaking for myself, I would say that absolutely it is complete bullshit. But again, that is my personal opinion and belief, and is no way representative of the Boulder Shelter. But like I said, the city of Boulder does have a camping ban in place. And the reason this came about is because, or at least part of the reason this came about, is that Boulder Creek Path and the parks in Boulder are especially lovely places. And the Boulder community is a relatively active one, and they like to make use of those areas. However, there are a number of homeless encampments in those areas. And that area is also fairly close to one of the local schools. And parents in the community were concerned about children's interactions with our clients. And so there are a number of outreach programs and initiatives. The Boulder Shelter has one, it's called Be There. And we go out to encampments and we try to provide services for people that don't come to the shelter to seek services. And so Boulder is concerned about its population of individuals experiencing homelessness. It is concerned about the drug usage that is in these encampments, any criminality that might be going on in these encampments. And one thing that I would just like to put out there is that the folks in these encampments are experiencing just as much trauma, if not more, than housed citizens of Boulder who might walk past them or interact with them. And so it's a really frustrating point of tension in our community. However, we are working very closely with a number of different service providers and government agencies here in Boulder to try and reach as many folks in encampments as possible to provide services to connect them to housing. Like I said, encampments are across the country. Homelessness has been on the rise, and criminalizing homelessness isn't going to make it go away. Housing does. um, it's, I know it might seem trite or redundant or simple, but housing ends homelessness. Arresting someone does not end their episode of homelessness. They might be in jail overnight or for a couple of days, or they might be incarcerated for a longer period of time. But at some point, they will exit the criminal justice system and they exit right back into homelessness that didn't actually solve the problem. And so that is one thing that we are struggling to deal with here in Boulder. Another aspect of that is that Boulder is a very affluent community. It's also a really incredible community that is really focused on creating solutions. And that right there, so solutions, affluent, and community. Homelessness is a systemic problem, not only across the country, but across the world. And simply because of the capitalistic systems that we have in place, our institutions, so many people fall into homelessness. And so as a result, one community can't just find one way to solve it. We have to come together as an entire community, not just as a couple of individuals here and there. And I think a student asked me, well, should we give money to folks if we see them on the street asking for money? And my response was, if that's something that you feel comfortable doing, then do it. However, to actually really affect change and to end someone's homelessness, not only that individual that you saw, but the entire community of unhoused individuals here in Boulder County, is to come together as a community to affect change for affordable housing, to affect change for more housing. Boulder is a community where housing is not only extremely expensive, but very scarce. I have been in the Boulder community for, oh goodness, what year is it? 2023. I've been in the Boulder community since 2015. I came here as a graduate student. I went to the university here. And I no longer live in this community because I cannot afford to. And I have a great community support network, but I still have to commute in every single day, and like so many other individuals in the surrounding communities. Um, and so the housing that we do have, it is extremely expensive. And so that in itself is prohibitive. And then we don't have that much housing available, much less affordable housing. And so if we could come together as a community, as a group of people saying, hey, there don't need to be individuals experiencing homelessness in Boulder County. This is absolutely absurd. We have to come together to affect change and say, hey, what do we need to do to create more housing solutions here in Boulder? And what do we need to do to say, hey, of those housing solutions, it, a lot of these, I don't know how many, the majority, most, all, who knows, but some of them have to be affordable because folks simply just can't afford to live in Boulder. And I know in the last several years, between COVID and our economic instability, the gap between fixed income individuals and the cost of living has increased dramatically. Just the rise in cost of living has really put the pressure on folks who were living paycheck to paycheck, who, due to COVID, lost their employment, who are just struggling financially. And we have to come together to make housing affordable for people so that they can regain control and security in their lives. That is one of the most fundamental aspects to this that's important to keep in mind. And so I hope that answered some of your questions. I'm happy to dive into more detail on a few things.
No, you provided a lot of information. I like that you touched on, because Boulder, it might be just Boulder, but that city can represent all types of cities around the world. Because me personally, who currently lives in Boulder, but like didn't come from here, or there at least since I'm not there right now. It is really stressful. Housing, even like, and I would never compare my situation to a person who's actually, experiencing homelessness, but just as a student, trying to find housing is a whole other game, and it's so stressful. And that's even we have to build our own communities by finding roommates and multiple roommates to be like, okay, let's find a place that we can all stay because this is insane. Like, I
Mhm.
really like that you touched on that, and I feel like a lot of people don't realize also the fact that if you were to arrest every person for being homeless, they're not going to trust other people to help them anymore because now they're going to go through the system, they're going to have that on their record, that's going to prevent them from finding jobs and really securing housing, and now they're just going to feel hopeless. And I feel like that's one of the biggest reasons I feel like we shouldn't be arresting people for not being housed, especially since the economy is just everything past COVID and even before, if we're being honest, but especially past COVID, like you said, has just, I think, really worsened already big
Mhm.
problems. I don't really know how else to put it. Like I feel like personally, I agree with the fact that giving somebody $5 on the side of the road isn't going to do much. And that back to that point, when you say come together as community, that it will affect more change in these areas, could you maybe just like break down some like specific, examples of how somebody could do that with other people? Like basically just like in community building, like, okay, you find a group of people, let's say you want to like affect change for one of the things you talked about specifically, what could they do to really make that, like, I guess some of the like stepping stones or blocks that they could do to get to that goal.
Absolutely. So one of the great things about community building is that you don't have to build it from scratch. So in your local areas and your local communities, I would say do a little digging, see if there is a homeless services provider that's already working to affect change with goodness, I'm all tongue tied now, to affect change with individuals experiencing homelessness, because that way you don't have to start from like absolutely zero. And so get involved with those organizations, see how you as an individual have a certain skill set and experience and perspective that can help forward that trajectory. But I would say get involved with organizations. If there isn't an organization or some kind of community that's already trying to put the spotlight on homelessness or provide homeless services, you can start one. I know that sounds daunting and terrifying, but especially if you're Gen Z, quite frankly, y'all are daunting and terrifying, and y'all can affect change like nobody's business. Join together with roommates, with friends, with families, um, to form a community that provides services. Of course, make sure that you're doing so safely and well informed, with providers who are trained to do or provide certain services and care. But we are all a resource together. And so also becoming aware of ballot initiatives and whatever is coming forward, not only at the state level and the federal level, but at the local level. Because like I said, homelessness is a systemic issue, and we don't have like the federal department on homelessness. That doesn't exist, unfortunately. Like I said, we do work closely with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Um, but that department is just an umbrella for so many other services and programs. And one of the reasons why the VA was so able to effectively change the number of veterans experiencing homelessness is because it's one organization dedicated to service veterans. And so, since we don't have an organization like that at the federal level, that means that all of the folks who are trying to change homelessness are doing so from a grassroots point of view. And so it's always at the local, it's always at the state level. So, like I'm saying, get involved at the local level, see what your city council is talking about in regards to homelessness. See if there are roundtables, see if there are open houses, see if there are forums, debates. figure out what kind of legislation is on ballots, what kind of legislation is being proposed. If it is trying to criminalize homelessness just to make it go away, to make parks better for farmers markets or something. Again, that's not actually solving the problem. See if they're actually solution oriented and not just criminalizing stuff. And then if you don't see any kind of language or legislation like that, you can you can put some forward. Like again, I Gen Z is incredible, but also millennials and Gen X and everybody else. We can all come together to make change ourselves. And so get involved with city council, your local representatives. Jonah Goose is an incredible representative here in Boulder County. He's a phenomenal human being. And just get in touch. I'm sure folks have done letter writing campaigns and have called offices of their elected officials, but getting involved in that way from a group community level to really increase that pressure to affect change. Another way is to get um, yourself or a group of friends involved in volunteering. Um, Pretty much every homeless service provider needs volunteers in some form or fashion. And I can tell you right off the bat that the Boulder Shelter, in the month of February alone, we had 400 volunteer service hours. And those folks are helping us prepare and serve our meals, providing care to clients and dorm supply. Like they're the folks giving them laundry detergents to do their laundry, passing over their mail from the PO box, that kind of stuff. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And so, if you really, really want to affect change, talk to your friends about this, talk to your families, say, well, do you have any experience with this? Another part of that is talking about the stigma. There are so many stigmatized experiences and identities in our society, which that is a whole nother conversation. And I would love to get on my soapbox about it. But there are so many people who have experienced homelessness that don't want to talk about it because not only was it a traumatic experience for them, but there's so much shame associated with that that is completely unnecessary. And that's just for folks who experience homelessness. That's not even touching on folks who are housing insecure. There have been moments in my life where I have been housing insecure. And because I had the relationships and resources, I was able to stay housed through that period of insecurity. And at the end of the day, that is exactly what causes homelessness for our clients and for people everywhere. They don't have the personal relationships or the financial or community resources to stay housed. And so, someone who is experiencing housing insecurity, who is unofficially. I use that with air quotes because there are official definitions for homelessness. Um, but someone who is couch surfing, who is staying with family or friends because they have nowhere else to go. Those folks are experiencing homelessness, but technically we call them housing insecure. And so folks are very can experience a lot of shame around that, can experience guilt around that, and there's no reason for that. As a community, we can make sure that we provide support for those people to make sure that they have the resources they need to make sure that their housing is stable and secure. And so, again, talking with folks, sharing experiences, again, only if you're comfortable, getting involved with an organization, getting involved politically, just spreading the word. I know actually the New York Times just released an article on the point in time count or the PINC count. That is the survey that is done every January to pretty much quantify the homeless population. And it can go into far more detail than I can here. But basically, they go out on a night in January when it's miserably cold because the rough premise is if folks are in encampments or experiencing homelessness on a night in the middle of January when it's bitterly cold, it's probably because they have nowhere else to go. And so that's kind of the rationale behind, okay, well, if they're experiencing homelessness on this night, then we can sort of provide an accurate number for more or less a homeless census. But there are a number of sources that can give you more information on the PIC count and different ways that folks are kind of getting to census numbers and census data on unhoused populations, as well as folks who are accessing homeless services, and where those folks are going and what they're doing. And hopefully that was a little bit. I'm happy to follow up with some other questions.
No, that was amazing. Thank you. That was, you just right there shared like the countless ways we can do things, because I think a conversation I recently had with a friend was just how, life has gotten so and I say this when I say like gotten, I don't mean to, say, oh, life was so much better and then the pandemic was the only thing that, no, it was just something that really like made life harder. And I think
Hmm.
one of the things that we've noticed, at least in our generation, is just that now, even though, Gen Z is known for being kind of like a powerhouse and, we get things done, whatever, there's also a lot of helplessness going on of like, well, what's the point? Like everything,
Hmm.
what's a post gonna do? What's a protest gonna do? What's a whatever, what is this, that the other gonna do? And I think there's, it's fair to kind of think of that in a way of like, well, honestly, posting like a black square isn't going to do anything, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try anything, because there are effective ways, like the ways you just listed down. Like I like that, and your entire presentation, everything you're talking about is community. It's community with your staff, of helping your own community in the city, and a community of people that are stigmatized. And when you talk about that stigma, I actually had a, that kind of led me to another thing I was wondering about, when thinking about helping people who are unable to be housed. I think people kind of come and think that they're kind of scared to interact with them. Well, and I'm not, for me personally, I know that for certain jobs and certain volunteer opportunities, you do need to be trained in, like how to deal with this kind of person in this situation, or a certain age group or a certain demographic of people. But is there like a, maybe something you want to share with people that might have this fear of like, oh, well, I don't want to work in soup kitchens, or I don't want to work in these certain areas because what if, somebody attacks me, or what if something, whatever, just all these like different ideas that are put into people's head to kind of keep them away from, just joining the group effort. I see the stigma with also just, looking down on people who aren't housed, but I also want to really address that stigma of, oh, they're dangerous, they're automatically dangerous. Because I think maybe if people started to understand that, these are just people like you who are just in a really difficult situation, maybe they might be more inclined to do something about it. But there is also, like you mentioned, some people who have dealt with such extenuating circumstances that have kind of caused them to maybe not be as social as other people. So yeah, if you could just like hint on that a little bit, I would love that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my official advice is only interact with individuals if you feel comfortable doing so. If, say, for example, you want to get involved in working to mitigate or solve homelessness, but you are scared or anxious about engaging with an individual on the street or going to an encampment, join up with an organization. Organizations have folks who are trained in social work, in handling trauma informed responses with individuals, for working with law enforcement if a situation does exacerbate. And so these folks are trained. There are safety protocol and policies in place. And so that is a really, really great way to get some really firsthand experience while also maintaining a sense of security and safety for a person. Um, Another thing is that living on the streets is an incredibly stressful, intense environment. And so folks have reactions that individuals who are housed might see as an overreaction or completely off the cuff or just dangerous or unacceptable. And much like any other trauma response, people have that response because it kept them safe before. And so please be very aware of that when you are engaging with individuals in the unhoused population. And again, only do so if you feel safe. And if you ever feel unsafe, immediately step back. Do not accelerate or exacerbate the situation and call 911. And so there are a number of law enforcement organizations that have non-emergency police hotlines. And so that way it's like, hey, someone seems to be in distress down by this encampment. I don't know what they might need, but it just seems like they need help, and you can reach out to that line. But just really keep in mind, I'm not saying go out there with a sandwich and say, "Hey, how can I help you?" But buddy system is really good. I always like working as a team, as a group. Community is good for that very reason. But also reach out to folks who do have this experience and say, what do you recommend? What is best practice? What is safe? What is the best way to provide support for individuals who need it, while also maintaining a boundary of safety and security for myself.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. I think for some people who might also be socially anxious, that's a very valid, like kind of fear to have if they don't, if they're not the best at like knowing what to say under pressure, they might, want to do other types of work. Like if that means like focusing on the government side and, trying to make sure certain legislation gets passed and things like that. I totally like that you touched on that. And I also really wanted to kind of focus a bit more on the staff. Like, how this does take a strong community. Like you said, they have to be trained, they have to be able to work in really stressful conditions, especially whether it's because of a weather if it's extreme weather conditions or if it's an influx of people coming in at one time. How do you keep your staff, aka your community, like strong and reliable and able to do all these things? Because I don't think, like you mentioned, like I don't think that the average person could do all that. It's a lot, and it's something I personally really admire. So I wanted to just know a bit more about that. How do you guys um kind of keep standing and strong and still and just making sure you get things done in a calm manner, because that's also something I don't think I'd be able to do. But yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So you kind of hit the nail on the head there. This work is not for everyone at all. It takes a very special kind of person to be program staff. So I'm an administrator at this organization. I do not work directly face to face with clients. Our program staff are the real heroes. They are truly incredible human beings who every single day of the year, rain, snow, sleet, shine, they are there working with our clients every single day. Um, and it's really incredible. It can also be a very traumatic job. So um, like I talked a lot about obstacles that folks might be experiencing, and certain trauma responses that they have to experiencing homelessness, that while they might serve them on the streets are not appropriate for other environments like the shelter. And so we have a very strict set of safety guidelines and procedures, that all of our staff have to adhere to. It's always working in teams, calling for backup immediately, communicating effectively, and making sure that we're all communicating the same thing. So we call it holding the line, because folks might try to it's kind of like a kid with two parents, well, mom said no, but maybe dad will say yes. It's like, no, we're all saying the exact same thing. You're not going to get any special treatment. Like everyone has to follow the rules, and that's how we maintain safety. But also, a lot of folks who experience homelessness are dealing with some pretty severe mental health issues. And so, and also substance abuse. We had someone a couple of months ago who overdosed on opioids, and it took 3 applications of Narcan to bring them out. And so that was an incredibly traumatic experience for the program staff that saved that person's life that evening. And so these folks are all trained when they come in trauma informed care responses. They are trained in CPR, AED, so the paddles, the automatic electronic defibrillator, and the use of Narcan, how to identify if someone's having a medical emergency, how to interact with someone who is coming off in a threatening manner. Like I mentioned, our pretty much our baseline at the shelter is you cannot stay here if you're being a threat to yourself or others. And we have very strict rules about what threatening behavior or a verbal assault looks like here, because it is so important to maintain a safe and secure environment for everyone here so that as staff and the other clients who are using our services. And so everyone is trained on that, and they are trained again and again and again. We also have mental health care partners come in, and they provide just kind of refreshers on saying, hey, this is what symptoms of a certain disorder might look like. This is what certain substances look like. This is how they might show up. If you're concerned about that, this is how to deal with that. And then we also have folks come in and provide support for our program staff, because this is an exhausting job. It is truly exhausting. And so we recently had a training and an open conversation about the experience of our staff of color dealing with our clients, because one of the verbal assaults that we have a no tolerance for is the use of racial slurs. That is considered an assault on someone, and we have a zero tolerance policy for it. And a lot of our program staff are people of color, and they experience that a lot. And it's just, how do you unpack that? So it's one thing to have a racial slur thrown at you, and just, let's say, an ordinary setting, like an ordinary public setting. It's very different when it is a client, someone who's experiencing homelessness, just spewing slurs and profanity at you, and then you have to immediately get back into work mode. That is an incredibly traumatic experience. And in our conversation, a number of staff shared their experiences and the challenges they faced dealing with that kind of malignment in the workplace, and how we can all work together as a community of staff here at the Boulder Shelter to make this a safe space for our employees, because that is the most important thing. And so another aspect of this job is making sure that we're okay, um, taking time for ourselves, assessing our mental and emotional well-being, because if you're burnt out, if you're exhausted, you can't do this job. And so that is something that folks really take extremely seriously here. And that's just the nature of the social work aspect of working at the shelter.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's also something that I don't think a lot of people like think about is just like that's why we talk about intersectionality a lot on this podcast is also because you can be part of different minority groups or just marginalized groups that combine together to make your life even harder. And so I can't even imagine having to try to even make sure you're safely working with a client while also being, you know, just hate crime at the same time. It's really confusing, I bet. So, thank you for sharing that. We are running out of time, and I have countless questions, but you have covered like more than I even expected you to cover. So, thank you so much for all that information. It was really, really helpful. And actually, personally, I can honestly say that I really am going to look more into what I can do, and maybe even volunteer in different areas around me, and try to get some of my friends to do the same thing. So I really, really am glad that you're doing this work, and I admire it a lot. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and your busy schedule to even talk to me. So I appreciate it.
Of course. And please, Lamise, if you have any other questions, or if you'd just like to take a tour of the shelter with some of your friends, please don't hesitate to reach out. As a woman of color, I kind of landed here in a very strange turn of events. But I am more than happy to share my story and any resources that I can help provide for the next generation of folks. So it was great chatting with you, and hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Bye.